All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming to our March STARS meeting. We'll continue not doing massive introductions across Zoom world, but that is a great looking group of people here. So I appreciate everybody being on this morning with us. I see, I have to give a shout out. I see Michelle Mayer on here, who once put up with me as a brand new EMT many years ago, including crashing into the Afton truck at St. Mary's. So if that doesn't warrant a shout out, I don't know what does. And then also thank you for everyone else for being here. So we do have some kudos for today. First of all, Chief Mayor, kudos to your Union County EMS for bringing us 2 direct to tertiaries inside a week. We're going to talk about one of those calls here shortly. And then also kudos to Golisano Children's, who came on board in Florida and did enroll their first kiddo over February. So that's exciting. As Doc Laffey said, they make them just as cute down there as they do up here. So I am going to go ahead and pause the recording today. We're actually going to do room for improvement first before we get into the kudos call. I decided to reverse the order because I'm worried about everybody's mental health if I keep doing it the opposite way. But we are going to talk about a pretty serious call that happened. And so I do want to make sure I pause the recording here for this. Awesome. So
hey, can I just, and this, you don't have to stop recording for this, but because I know Stephanie was thinking the same thing about dispatch in the chat. Who is like kind of medical control for the dispatchers? You know what I mean? When it comes to like that, do people review, or who's in charge of medically reviewing their calls and that kind of stuff? It just
I think they all have different. I think all the different dispatch agencies have different medical control. Dr. Shu is ours. We're fortunate to have the same medical director for our agencies as our dispatch, but very often they're not the same.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point that that Dr. Antevi was making down there, is because he's functioning as medical control, and I think that's been a real focus of his, is to kind of get them, you know, focused in on how quickly, particularly in the cardiac arrest cases, and that how quickly can you recognize that they need CPR and get that started, and I think having the same person being medical control for both seems like it'd make a lot of sense. And I'm not surprised that it's not that way, and that it's way more complicated and not efficient. And obviously none of that surprises me, but
there was a position statement that came out recently. I'll try to find it and send it after the meeting, that was pushing back against that, the no-go, which is the Antevi thing, where they cut to the chase. And I can't remember who put the position statement out about it, but it was basically saying, listen, this doesn't work. People are getting too much CPR when they don't need it. And in my head, I'm thinking, yes, CPR can cause injury when you don't need it, but it won't save anybody if you don't do it. So I'll try to find that.
I think there's that. I mean, that doesn't surprise me at all. I think, in fact, I would suspect, if you asked, that was somewhat the point. You know, let's start doing a little too much rather than too little. I think that obviously that's going to end up being the case. Now, where do you draw the line? I guess that's where the discussion comes in, and I understand that as well.
Yeah, I've been pushing.
But no matter what the case is, you know, there's a lot of extraneous information being extracted that, under any circumstances, I'm not sure gets you any closer to where you need to be. Does that? I mean, whether you go, you know, 5 seconds or 10 seconds, but there are, I mean, I think you can find quite a few calls where it took too long, and there's got to be some way to get it to not take as long.
Yeah, I think that was put out. I think that was a position statement by the NAEMSP, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But I think, you know, the problem with this call that's unique is that this wasn't a single error. You know, the family, I hadn't had a chance to listen to that call, but that was an extremely difficult interaction for the provider, for the 911 dispatcher to be talking to the family. I just feel like they couldn't really get a straight story. And at one point, we're even told that the patient was doing better. So I think, you know, it's a hard situation. I'm not sure that there's one solution for this call. I mean, I agree with Dr. Laffey that if you had put this team in a simulation and they asked, you know, is there a pulse, and you tell them there's no pulse, that's an easy sort of scenario, but this kid had a pacemaker, so was getting a faint but non-perfusing rhythm. They misunderstood the end tidal readings. A lot of different things were sort of factoring in here, and I don't know. I wish there was an easy. In my own sort of pessimistic opinion, I see this case. If we had trained this crew 9 times over again, I don't know that they would have gotten it. And I think it's
I agree.
It's a good one for reflection, but I don't know that we're going to find the answer for this particular scenario.
I agree with
Well,
most
I
of.
completely agree with that, Dr. Finney. I mean, mainly because I still don't have any idea of what happened, right? So it's hard to.
Yeah, exactly. And
I mean,
we've poured over
It's
this
hard to say,
case.
oh, if we just would have done this, because I still don't have the slightest idea what happened to this kid. I don't have any clue. So I completely agree with you there. There's no question. This was a challenging one. And I
Right.
think what it does, what you do learn is how hard it can be, and again, when I listened to that call, I completely felt for that, that person on the dispatch. My gosh, it was super challenging to get the right information. I completely agree with every single thing you said there.
Yeah, I do also. It's a very complicated call, and there's layers of things happening over and over again, distracting things, pulling them away from the core issues. But I think from a system improvement perspective, a couple of things that really stand out for me are the things that we've already mentioned, the things about dispatch, how long it took to get to the core information that you would need on any pediatric call. So again, it doesn't have to be Antevi's position on the no-go, but something in your dispatch procedures to get you back to the question, are they breathing? Do they have a pulse as a primary objective of your call? And I get that you have to redirect the caller, but it took her a very long time to redirect that caller to the core issue. So addressing pieces of dispatch to get you to those core information is one area for improvement. And then the other one that stands out to me specifically from the limited data available on this call that we've seen is that I saw immediately the downtrend, the very low end titles and the downtrend of it. And so if there was something procedurally, either in training or protocol or both, and sort of a bundle approach for end tidal CO2, when it's that low, that's like termination quality end tidal there. If our end tidal CO2 is less than 10 for 20 minutes, we can terminate a code. So if it's that low, and it was that low on that call at several points, it necessitates reevaluating circulation by color, by pulse, by ultrasound if they have it, and so just those two things, addressing, dispatch and addressing end tidal assessments would be what the improvement I would take away from this particular call.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the end tidal thing is something that both the medical director for this agency and myself discussed with the crew. And that is an area that is going to be a focus going forward for educating that specific district. You guys know, I don't have to tell you this, but there's a lot of misconceptions and misunderstanding of how end tidal is, what information end tidal provides you as far as paramedics are concerned. I see it get confused all the time, and this is another perfect example. They got hung up on end tidal must indicate a respiratory problem, and they just kept going back. The lung sounds are good. We're ventilating well. Back to the end tidal being low, back to the lungs. Nobody ever went to think about this could be a perfusion problem. So absolutely agree. There are educational and training things that need to happen with this crew. And maybe, maybe that'll be enough to prevent something like this in the future. I sure hope so.
I think it's also interesting. I don't know if this specific came up, but how many times do we see that end up getting blamed on equipment malfunction, right? That's like the fallback. If it's not showing you what you think it should be showing you, then it's not working. And we've seen that quite a few times. And I don't know that happened in this case, but I've seen that a lot. It's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. The damn thing's broke.
Absolutely agree.
We have it in procedure now because that was happening a lot and people were using it to get away from not putting end tidal on advanced airways. And we said, listen, it is in procedure now. If you can't get an end tidal on your advanced airway, you either need to pull the advanced airway or you need to get another monitor on the scene. Because if your monitor is broken, it needs to go in for service. This is not just, you can try to troubleshoot the device, but it's in procedure now. They cannot turn in a report without a proper end tidal. And and blame it on equipment. That was a trend we had a couple of years ago, and it's been addressed through that by adding that into procedure. They have to have an end title that is, at least a number. They can't just have a 0 because it wasn't working.
This is a great conversation. I am going to go ahead and wrap a bow on this one, but I think all important things. The end title continues to strike me as a future source of where we can still make some improving strides in learning. So I am going to move on to the kudos call, just because I want to make sure we get our good in for that crew as well. We did have one of our Franklin County agencies. They ran a call. They did go direct to tertiary, and I'll point out that was no small feat. They transported 47.5 miles to bring this kid in. I'll try to kind of hit the highlights here, but you can see they were called for breathing problems for a STARS patient. They were able to access the information prior to arrival. Upon their arrival, you can see initial assessment and description: not alert, unresponsive, or responsive to painful stimuli, cool, pale, and dry, respiratory at 30, shallow, with some accessory muscle use, and rhonchi in all fields. You can see the kid was getting sick earlier in the day and also started having increased seizure activity. And then that's what eventually prompted the 911 call as the kid got worse. At baseline, you can see the kid does not normally follow commands, so that is normal for him. And then vital signs: upon arrival, the patient was found to have a low SpO2, was placed on the nasal cannula, and then you can see secured. And they did noted, especially with this kid who does not have good muscular control, that they patted him in a good sniffing, breathing position. So they did start an IV. They started the nasal cannula, or remained hypoxic on the nasal cannula, so they switched to a non-rebreather, so an appropriate titrate up on their oxygen admin. And then one of the things that really stood out to me about this call was they took a temp and they believed it. So speaking of, we take vital signs and we don't always trust the equipment, the thermometer's got to be like one of the worst offenders on that list. But they did believe it for this kid. It was 90.2. And they took multiple measures to try and warm that kid up. So covering him with blankets. They talked about they turned the heat up in the back of their rig. And then they also noted on the form that he potentially was a candidate for a corticosteroid. They called for orders and were granted orders to administer that by Doc Laffey. So arrived and transfer of care, including noting that they left the patient's emergency medication and his VNS bracelet with the patient. So I am envious of this report. I wished all of my trip sheets I'd written in my career looked this good. So I think pretty well done. You can see I brought in some of the anticipated emergencies for the kid, and ultimate outcome and course for this kid. He did end up receiving some treatment for probable pneumonia, and then he ultimately did end up in the PICU for a while, but as his stats improved, he was able to step down and then was sent home with also they treated for the increased seizure activity. So overall, pretty good outcome. I was impressed with a lot of things from the crew, and I thought they did a really good job, including frequent vital signs. They have vital signs almost every 5 to 8 minutes the entire ride to the hospital, and documenting all their efforts to encounter the problem, tried to fix the problem. So kudos to them very much. So I know we are after 9:30, so please, anybody who has to go, I certainly understand, but I'm gonna go ahead and finish out the meeting real quick. So any other comments or follow-up you wanted on this one, Dr. Laffey?
No, that was great. He did wonderful. That course sounds more, I think, a little more complicated than it really was. He did really well. Needed just a little bit of oxygen and ventilatory support. He had pneumonia, but he probably also had a fair amount of atelectasis as well in his lungs. And they did a great job. I was kind of waiting, listening to the report. I was just waiting for them to talk about the steroids. So that was awesome. When the fact that I heard that he was coming, and my first thought after opening up his chart is, have they given steroids? And no sooner did I think that than they called back and said they're asking for steroids. So that was great.
Awesome. Yeah.
100%. the most important thing that could have been done for the kid. If anything, nothing good was gonna come of this unless he got his steroids. I don't think it can't really overstate how important it is to get these kids their steroids quickly. They will never, ever, ever, ever get better unless you do that. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Clapping. I'm gonna run everybody through the numbers. The map has gotten a little bit bigger now that we got one down here, but for my local St. Louis and or Missouri, Illinois people, you know, this is what STARS looks like from the 30,000 foot view. So we're starting to be able to do a lot more metrics and tracking, and so we think that's pretty cool. You can see we've had an increase in daily logins year over year. Here is my attendance award. So as always, like I can't catch Collinsville. I'm gonna have to start setting alarms on my phone. So Central County's up there too. So kudos to everybody, especially my dispatch agencies who are logged in and ready to go. And then status by star, you can see we got 800 active currently. Actually, I think it hit 809 as of last night. There were a bunch of approvals yesterday. And we do seem to be sort of picking up the pace on enrolling. Emergency activations are down a little bit. We'll kind of watch that trend, but that's not the stickiest of stats, so I'm not too worried about that one. What I think is more accurate is the dispatch, and the 44 for February last year was a lie. That was when we rolled out the new system, so there was a lot of incidental noise that got recorded there. For February 2022, here were the agencies that received emergency dispatch. And we had 21 transports and no non-transports that I know of. So it's all good stuff. We're continuing to pick up numbers. And like I said, kind of a sign of the increasing number of kids that are slowly getting enrolled. We had 34 approved for the month of February. So wanted to touch real quick on training. Our new LMS system is rolling out next Monday. It will start with just 2 courses, a 30-minute emergency pediatric trach course and a 30-minute pediatric gastric tubes. If your agency has not had these, you know, please feel free to assign them. I'm going to send out via the email, probably a separate meeting. You can either just send a link to your personnel and say, here, go take this. But we also have the ability, I have the majority of your agencies enrolled already, and you can be a coordinator and you can actually assign it to crew members. So especially if you're from an agency where most of your people have already had this training from us at some point, but you have a set of new hires and you want to say like, okay, I want to assign as part of your new hire process, you 4 or 6 employees, here, we want you to take these courses on the side too. You can track their progress, you can see their completions. And so it's just another tool I want my SP admins to be able to have as far as rolling education out at their agency. So, and then on April 1st, we'll release the Autism for First Responders on there as well. So more to come on that. I'll have a kind of probably a separate meeting for the people who are just interested in participating directly in that and want to have, you know, act as an admin or a coordinator. So awesome. I apologize. I finally went over. Been doing so good for the last year. Any questions, comments, anything that's come up?
We had an interesting conversation here about pediatric BiPAP. We've had other conversations with our physician advisory board on, you know, the value of adding that to our system, and it always was sort of, you know, other things are more important. We ended up getting the Neo suckers on Dr. Laffey and Dr. Hodges' suggestion, but it came back up in relation to one of the STARS that was dispatched, that was enrolled in our area, and there was a email string from the ENT where it listed off sort of things that would be very effective for this kid other than intubation, like racemic epi, high flow nasal cannula, and then at the very end it said pediatric CPAP. And we don't have that currently. We don't have the equipment. We have the machine that will do it, but we don't have the masks, and we don't have the procedure written down for us. And so it came back up and circulated through sort of our product development committee and our clinical procedures committee, and it didn't really get resolved. It may come back up at our physician advisory board on Thursday, but Is that something that you guys are starting to see more frequently in the STARS population, that pediatric BiPAP is a choice? And if so, is it something we need to start preparing for?
Dr. Laffey, I didn't know if you want to answer that or.
Yes, we use it. I don't, in various cases, not just STARS stuff. I would say we probably do in a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of variability depending on, clinical situation, but I'd say we often start with high flow first, which is another form of support. To what degree it provides that support, and there's a lot of questions about it. But we often start with that. In a lot of the cases that we end up moving to a CPAP or a BiPAP, will start with high flow. How quickly they need to get it, or how frequent would you use it in kids in the field? That's the $1 million question. I'm trying to think of the number of times where, gosh, that would have been great to have that going before we got there. Not too many times that I can think of off the top of my head. I don't know if Dr. Finney has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be something that you're going to see more commonly as agencies get access to this equipment. I think that's been the rate limiting step in a lot of ways. There are some agencies that we see now in a fairly frequent basis who have access to this. As their paramedics become more comfortable with using it in pediatrics, we're going to see it more often. So I think, again, I agree with Dr. Laffey. You start, the sort of general rule in pediatrics is you start at the least invasive option and you escalate from there. But definitely you will start to see this going forward, I would say, over the next few years as agencies get it on board.
Okay.
That makes sense.
And it'll be not just STARS patients. I mean, this is something you'll see for everybody, like he was saying.
In fact, I would say they're not inherently, I guess that's not true. Lots of other potential uses for it outside of STARS, I guess I should say.
Right. I mean, for our district, we run a fair amount of kids. I think we run a couple thousand kids a year, and of those, maybe 400-ish are what we would consider sort of yellow or red, like moderate to critical. And most of them are still not respiratory. Like probably a third of that is respiratory. 2/3 is neuro. It's almost always seizures and postictal patients that we end up seeing. And then a handful of STARS patients with, their crazy physiologies. But so it's still going to be a small number for us. But we're trying to figure out, have we eclipsed that, pro and con thing, right? It takes a long time to train and deploy new equipment and procedures, but if it's worth it, we should do it.
Were there any other questions or comments? Awesome. Thank you, everybody. I apologize for going over today. I will endeavor to get back under my 30 minutes next month, but it was good discussion. I appreciate it. I know the topics have been a little heavy for the last 2 meetings, so please reach out if you guys have any questions or concerns. I am sort of catching up on the chat over here on the side, and certainly thank you to all our dispatchers. I didn't intend for any part of that to be a knock. It's a tough job, and I'm just always looking for room for improvement and how we can improve the system. So I hope nobody's offended, and thank you guys all very much for what you do.
Absolutely. As I said, first thought when I was listening to that call is, oh my God, there's something I could never freaking do. I wanted to, you know what I mean? I was pulling my hair out just sitting here listening to it, thinking, my God, what a nightmare.
I've always
And
thought
then
the
to do
same
that
thing.
all the time, call after call after call. There is no freaking way.
At least on the truck, I had an out for my adrenaline when I caught the calls. Like,
Well, I mean, and you're in control. You've got some control of the situation, right? I mean, you're,
Yeah,
there's,
and-
like, completely no control you have, right? And you just, like I said, that's what I was thinking when I was listening to. Is like, holy crap, there's no
Well,
way.
and they just wrote into the legislature that PTSD is considered work-related for first responders, but not dispatchers. That's a bunch
Oh,
of,
good Lord.
right, that's a bunch of baloney.
I need to get
Oh,
that
absolutely.
Yeah.
I almost want, it's almost like a perfect setup for it, because again, there's